Hey everyone. So you've heard of Azure DevOps, but you're wondering, hey, will this work for me in my specific situation? It has Azure in the name, so does that imply it requires Azure? It's made by Microsoft. Does that imply it only works with Microsoft technologies? We'll cover these questions and a few others in this video, the 5 things you should know about Azure DevOps. Let's get started. So the first thing we'll take a look at is, does Azure DevOps require an Azure subscription? While Azure DevOps does run on top of Azure, you do not need an Azure subscription to make use of it. In fact, you can sign up for Azure DevOps for free using a Microsoft account or an organization account, for example, an account tied to Office 365, by going to dev.azure.com and clicking on the Start Free link. Let's walk through the process and see what this looks like. So we'll start by clicking on the Start Free button, and then we'll sign in using a Microsoft account in this case. You can also sign in with an organizational account. Click Next. Now we're going to enter our super secret password, sign in, and then choose yes or no here. Now we're going to click on the Continue button on this dialog. It'll take us into the brand new Azure DevOps organization that we just created. It takes a few seconds to get everything set up. Great, here we are in our brand new organization. And it's just that easy, getting the new organization set up. Took a few seconds and a couple clicks. And now we have a fully functioning Azure DevOps project waiting for us to make use of it. So now that you can set up Azure DevOps for free, you might be wondering, well, how long can I use it for free? Well, if we take a look at the pricing page here, you'll notice that there's some individual services that offer some free aspects of Azure DevOps. For example, under Azure Pipelines, you can have one free hosted CI/CD pipeline along with 1,800 minutes for that hosted CI/CD pipeline. 1,800 minutes comes out to about 30 minutes a day, or 60 minutes a day for 30 days. You can also have one free self-hosted CI/CD pipeline, which means on-prem, so running your own agent on-prem, and with that comes unlimited build minutes. If you need more than that, you can pay $40 extra per month for the Microsoft hosted CI/CD job, or $15 extra per month for self-hosted, again with unlimited minutes. For Azure Artifacts, you get 2 gigabytes of free storage, then starting at $2 per gigabyte after that. So those are some of the free things that are offered for Azure DevOps right out of the box. Under the basic plan, it's free for the first 5 users. So if your team is 5 users or less, well then it's completely free to use. And it's worth mentioning this isn't a stripped down version of Azure DevOps. It's all the basic services that you would expect to see in Azure DevOps. So for example, it's the free offerings we just talked about with Azure Pipelines and Artifacts, but that also includes then Azure Boards, Azure Repos, and Azure Artifacts. We have load testing on here as well, but it's worth mentioning that load testing has been deprecated. And if you have a need for test plans, the ability to, for example, create test suites and test cases and then work through those using a web-based test runner, then you can get the test plans aspects of it, which costs an additional $52 per month. If you happen to be a Visual Studio subscriber, then you already have access to any number of Azure DevOps accounts, and those accounts do not account against your 5 free users. So this is a pretty neat benefit of Visual Studio subscriptions. So with Azure DevOps being a Microsoft product, does that imply that it only works for Microsoft technologies, such as .NET? Or can it work with any language for any platform? If I'm writing applications using Java or maybe Node.js, can I still use Azure DevOps? Well, in short, yes. You can use Azure DevOps regardless of what platform or language you're using. There's an article in MSDN magazine titled "Any Language, Any Platform with Azure DevOps Projects." In this article, there's a table that shows some of the frameworks and platforms that are supported by Azure DevOps. And you can see here there's multiple open source, non-Microsoft related platforms listed that are supported. But keep in mind, while this list several non-Microsoft languages and frameworks, this is not the full set of technologies covered by Azure DevOps. For example, while Dart is not included in this article, there is also a Dart Toolkit extension that can be used to build Dart projects within Azure DevOps, and you can find that out in the Azure DevOps Marketplace, for example, along with a whole bunch of other extensions for other types of languages and frameworks. If you'd like to see how other Microsoft customers have made use of Azure DevOps, they have actually a pretty neat site out here. If you go to customers.microsoft.com, you can come down here and search for customer stories. So if we go into search, for example, and search for Azure DevOps, you will find lots of results over here, various companies that have made use of Azure DevOps for various things. There's some pretty neat stories out here that you can go out and you can kind of see, for example, maybe another company has done something similar to you or what you want to do, and they've made use of Azure DevOps or any other Microsoft technologies for that matter. In this case, we're just looking at Azure DevOps results. But you can see there's quite a few customer stories out here. This is a really, really neat resource to see what other organizations have done with some of the Microsoft tooling. So it's pretty obvious that Azure DevOps works with Microsoft's Azure cloud hosted platform. But how well does Azure DevOps work with any other cloud providers such as AWS or Google's cloud platform GCP? As mentioned in the MSDN article a moment ago, Azure DevOps is for any language, any platform, and any cloud. So while Azure DevOps will naturally have the best and most complete user experience for integrating with Azure, it can also be used with AWS and GCP. In fact, Amazon has published a set of tasks for Azure DevOps that makes it very easy to work with the various AWS offerings when using Azure DevOps. You can find this task out in the Azure DevOps Marketplace, where you can install it and make use of it within your pipelines. Google has not published any tasks for GCP, but you can still use Azure DevOps for publishing to GCP if you like. You just have to take care of some of the wiring up of the tasks yourself. It's also worth pointing out that you're not limited to Azure, AWS, and GCP. If you happen to be using any other cloud hosting service out there that lets you script deployments, updates, etc., then you can utilize Azure DevOps to bring efficiency to your processes. If you happen to be making use of infrastructure as code, utilizing something like Terraform, there are also Terraform extensions available in the marketplace as well for Azure DevOps. Another benefit of Azure DevOps comes along with the use of open source projects. So if you happen to be working on an open source project, you can actually get up to 10 free parallel jobs along with unlimited build minutes per month, which is a pretty awesome deal if you're doing open source projects, so definitely worth checking out. So as you might guess, Azure DevOps provides a best-in-class experience for CI/CD pipelines. With Azure Pipelines, you get cloud-hosted pipelines for Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. This is pretty awesome, especially if you happen to be creating applications that you need to build and deploy across more than one of these platforms. That way you have your pipelines in one tool in one place. You get support for any language, any platform, and any cloud. We talked about this already, but this carries through with Azure Pipelines as well. Native support for containers and Kubernetes. If you happen to be making use of containers and Kubernetes, this is a very easy thing to do with Azure DevOps Pipelines. Integrates with GitHub and Azure DevOps public projects. If you happen to have your source code in GitHub, for example, well, you can still make use of the Azure Pipelines and tie the two together fairly seamlessly. An ability to deploy to on-prem data centers, any cloud, or hybrid, a mix of the two if you prefer. So you can run your builds and deployments out in the cloud, you can run them on-prem, you can mix the two together as needed. Let's summarize the 5 things we discussed today that you need to know about Azure DevOps. First, Azure DevOps does not require an Azure subscription. You can make use of Azure DevOps without ever having an Azure subscription if you want to. Azure DevOps is not limited to Microsoft technologies. It can be utilized with other technologies such as Java, Go, PHP, you name it, it works with it. Azure DevOps will work with any cloud provider, such as obviously Azure, but also AWS, GCP, or any other cloud provider that you might be utilizing. Azure DevOps is a great choice for open source software. If you happen to have open source projects that you work with and manage, you can make use of many of the features of Azure DevOps, such as the pipelines, for example, for no cost. Azure DevOps provides the best-in-class experience for CI/CD, and you can see this through all the features and benefits that Azure Pipelines brings to the table. So that covers the top 5 things you need to know about Azure DevOps. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, please go ahead and click like now, subscribe if you'd like to get notifications for new content as we add it. Thanks.